Hello and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Here's what's coming up on the show tonight. It's a crucial, though sensitive time for China. In a few days from now, Xi Jinping is set to secure a third term at a party congress. This will ensure his place as its most powerful leader since Mao Zedong. Xi's security machine is currently in overdrive. More than 1.4 million people have been arrested across the country. But that's not the story. Amid this tight security apparatus ahead of the party congress, there is a show of rare defiance. A protest against President Xi himself. You see, the average Chinese citizen is frustrated and angry. Public anger is now swelling. They're voicing frustration towards the harsh lockdowns, the tightened security across Beijing, restricted travel. The Chinese have plenty to be upset about. Even as Xi Jinping gets ready to secure a third term, will he be able to quell this rare wave of dissent? And that is our focus on Gravitas tonight. Stay with us. Did you see that? Beijing woke up to those banners today. They were hung up on an overpass right in the heart of China's capital city. What does it say? I have some translations for you now. Say no to the COVID test, yes to food. No to lockdown, yes to freedom. No to lies, yes to dignity. No to cultural revolution, yes to reform. No to a great leader, yes to vote. Don't be a slave, be a citizen. Yes, all those things were written on one of those banners. The message on the second banner was much more grave. Go on a strike, remove the dictator and national traitor Xi Jinping. The protest was brief, but it didn't escape the attention of the people nearby. Let me show you why. There were thick plumes of smoke billowing from the bridge. There was a loudspeaker too. It was playing a voice recording of the same protest slogans. Those are some incredible pictures. This was a rare protest against Chinese president in Beijing. It ended swiftly. We don't know who was behind it. We'll just say we hope they are safe. Because within a few days from now, Xi Jinping will secure a third term in power. And the Chinese state, as we know, has zero tolerance for something like this right now. Whomsoever the Communist Party considers a threat is being dealt with harshly. A major and sweeping crackdown is underway. And this is our cover story on Gravitas tonight. At the center of our story today is one ministry, the Ministry of Public Security. What is its purpose? Public security. According to the website of the Chinese government, basically this ministry oversees the vast internal security apparatus of the Chinese state. And we all know how important internal security is for the Communist Party. It is one of the main tools that the party uses to maintain its grip on power. Since June, the Ministry of Public Security has been conducting an operation. It's a 100-day operation. And reports say that more than 1.4 million people have been arrested across the country so far. On what charges? We don't know that. Chinese authorities are calling them criminals. Are they really criminals? We don't know that either. However, what we can say for sure is this. The Chinese security apparatus has gone into an overdrive, and it is proclaiming loyalty to the party. Consider what a top official of the Ministry of Public Security said recently. I'm quoting, "We have always considered the general requirements of loyalty to the party, serving the people, impartial law enforcement and strict discipline." Loyalty to the party and strict discipline. These two rules apply not just to the officers of the Chinese security establishment, but to the citizens too. And that brings me back to Beijing. The 20th Communist Party Congress begins this weekend. It happens once in every 5 years, and Xi Jinping wants to use this opportunity to consolidate power. A term extension for him now seems like a formality. Tough measures are being put in place in Beijing. In fact, now I have some stories for you. Extra security personnel have been hired in Beijing. 42 guards will keep an eye on key people. Who are these key people? Individuals deemed to be troublemakers, according to one report. Residents of Beijing are not being allowed to come back. Thousands of travelers have received these orders. They want to come back home, but Chinese authorities are blocking their return. But why? It's a story we've reported multiple times. Over COVID fears, authorities are afraid that open borders might flare up the pandemic situation in Beijing ahead of this crucial Congress. The police in Beijing have swung into action. They have banned drone flights. Cops are going after critics. They have been asked to leave Beijing under a police escort. Well, today's protest hardly represents a serious challenge to Xi Jinping, but it also confirms that despite all these tough measures, the Communist Party cannot keep a lid on dissent in China. Rare dissent, but dissent nonetheless. Let's move on now and talk about the Indian economy. Yesterday we had told you about the IMF's latest projections, the warning of an increasing risk of a global recession. India has emerged as a bright spot in this assessment now. But there are challenges for India too, and tonight we'll break down the latest numbers for you. Let's get started. India's latest retail inflation figures are out. First things first, what is retail inflation? It indicates how quickly prices of basic commodities are rising. You know, the things that you and I use on a daily basis. So what do the numbers say? They remain a cause of concern. India's retail inflation for September rose to 7.41%. This was mainly due to rising food prices. Inflation levels remain a cause of concern. September was the 9th consecutive month during which inflation remained high. India's Reserve Bank is responsible for keeping inflation in check. The upper limit for inflation, according to the RBI, is 6%. And retail inflation currently is well over 7%. Now, for the sake of comparison, retail inflation stood at 4.35% a year ago. So yes, the rising inflation should be a cause of concern. But how big of a problem is this? What about the other macroeconomic indicators? That has to be factored in. How is the Indian economy poised? Well, India looks better placed than the rest of the world in some areas. Let's now take a look at some key metrics. India's growth forecast for this year stands at 6.8%. Yes, the IMF has slashed India's growth projections. But despite that, India is likely to remain one of the world's fastest growing economies. What about debt? It is projected to be 84% of the GDP, a bit on the higher side. But India's reserves are strong. By the end of September, the RBI had well over $500 billion in its reserves. Let's talk about fiscal deficit now. That is the difference between revenues and earnings of the government. It is above 32%. So what does all this mean, all these figures? To sum up, India's growth remains strong. Debt and inflation need to be managed, and that needs to be an ongoing process. Let's tell you what's actually happening now. India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is keeping an eye on all those numbers too. She plans to use the next union budget to deal with some of these challenges. Sitharaman said earlier that she plans to keep growth priorities on top while addressing the concerns around inflation. The world will carefully watch India's response because the global economy faces the same set of challenges as of now. According to the IMF, the global economy is troubled by three major problems. Listen in.
The global economy continues to face steep challenges shaped by three powerful forces: the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the cost of living crisis caused by persistent and broadening inflation pressures, and the slowdown in China. The three largest economies, the United States, China, and the euro area, will continue to stall. In short, the worst is yet to come.
Yes, the worst is yet to come. The situation has created some unique problems for India. What are those challenges? Number one, crude prices. They are fluctuating at the moment. 85% of the oil used in India is imported. So the Indian economy is quite sensitive to crude price movements. And right now, oil producers want to raise prices. They are cutting their production. That means more expensive oil for India and probably Indians. Let's now come to challenge number two. The world's leading economy is falling into a recession. We're all talking about it. This global slowdown might hurt Indian exports, since an inflation might force foreign buyers to cut back on their orders to India. And this could have multiple implications. It could drag down India's growth, widen India's trade deficit, and affect India's foreign reserves. How India navigates through all these challenges could very well decide the future course for the Indian economy. The global economic climate and its impact on India remains a top focus for us, and we will be keeping an eye on the future developments as well. Our next story is about Byju's, India's biggest edtech company. It has decided to sack 5% of its workforce. That's around 2,500 employees. Why? Because Byju's is going through losses, so it's on a cost-cutting spree, as are several other companies. In the last few months, a host of Indian startups have laid off their employees. Who are they? What challenges do they face? And will firing employees really solve the problems of these companies? Here's a report with all the details.
It is India's biggest edtech company with the highest market valuation. Since its inception in 2011, it has struck many big-ticket deals with a slew of high-profile buyouts. But 2022 is proving to be a big challenge for Byju's. Look at how it's faring. In June, it was forced to eliminate hundreds of jobs and slash plans for a $1 billion acquisition. In September, it was forced to delay its initial public offering and postpone it by 12 months due to macroeconomic factors. We're in October now, and Byju's has taken another consequential decision. It plans to lay off 2,500 employees. That's around 5% of its workforce. It will be sacked in the next 6 months. These job cuts will unfold across products, content, media, and technology teams. Reports say this would be one of the largest layoffs by a major Indian startup. The question is, why? The answer is profit. Byju's says it plans to use these cost-cutting measures to achieve profitability as the fiscal year ends. Its statement reads, "As a mature organization that takes its responsibility towards investors and stakeholders seriously, we aim to ensure sustainable growth alongside strong revenue growth. These measures will help us achieve profitability in the defined timeframe of March 2023. Byju's move is significant. It could open a can of worms, set a precedent for other startups, some of which are already taking such steps. Like Front Row, another Bengaluru-based edtech company. It has laid off 75% of its workforce. That's around 130 employees. Meanwhile, several Indian unicorns, or companies with a valuation of $1 billion, are announcing similar moves. For instance, Ola, Blinkit, Unacademy, and Vedantu. They're all blowing out their remaining candles and laying off a considerable number of employees. What explains this trend? Why are startups on a firing spree? There are a host of reasons. Number one, they face a funding squeeze, courtesy geopolitical instability, pandemic-induced slowdowns, and growing rates of inflation. A new report by PwC says that due to these factors, investments in Indian startups have dropped 40% this year. They've gone from $10 billion in 2021 to just $6.8 billion in 2022. The second reason behind this trend is slower growth. Most of these startups are not making enough profits. Their stocks are plummeting. Their revenues are falling. A study says in March and April, Indian startups raised $5.8 billion. That's about 15% lower than what they made during the same period last year. The third reason is growing labor costs. In 2021, Indian startups had a ball. They benefited from the lockdowns, attracted billions in private funding, launched a host of new verticals, and went on a colossal hiring spree. Now, facing a lack of cash and falling revenues, and pandemic-tailored verticals falling flat, many businesses are struggling to pay salaries. And new employees are pushing for increments. So what do? They sack their staff to stay afloat. Will this solve their problems? Only time will tell. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Before we move on to our next story, I want you to listen to a soundbite.
Russia is ready to start these supplies. The ball is in the EU's court, so to say. If they want to, just let them open the tap and that's it.
You know him. That's the Russian President Vladimir Putin. To put his comment in context, Putin was talking about gas supplies, rather resuming Russian gas supplies to Europe. And like you heard him say, the ball is in the EU's court. If they want to, then the taps can be turned on. What taps are we talking about here? The taps of the Nord Stream. The same Nord Stream that's become a flashpoint in the Ukraine war. Allow me to give you a little background now. Nord Stream is Russia's largest gas pipeline to Europe. This is an undersea pipeline. It is 1,200 kilometers long and stretches from the Russian coast near St. Petersburg to northeastern Germany. The Nord Stream was opened back in 2011. What was its capacity? The Nord Stream can send up to 170 million cubic meters of gas per day. A similar project has been built parallel to the Nord Stream, and it's called the Nord Stream 2. Now, Nord Stream 2 was supposed to become operational in 2022. But as we all know, that never happened. Because when Russia invaded Ukraine, Germany halted its approval for Nord Stream 2. And now, like I was saying, the Nord Stream project has become a flashpoint in the war. The West claims that Russia is weaponizing energy. The Kremlin denies this. In June, Russia cut Nord Stream 1 supplies by 75%. In July, the line was closed down for 10 days because of maintenance. That's what Russia said. 1 month later, Nord Stream 1 was shut down entirely. This time, Russia cited equipment problems. And with September came a development no one saw coming. Leaks were detected in both the Nord Stream 1 and the Nord Stream 2. The West cried sabotage. Putin called it an act of international terrorism. Listen in.
There's no doubt this was an act of international terrorism.
Now, Russia says preparing the pipelines will take up to a year. but it is ready to supply gas through the sole undamaged link of the Nord Stream 2. My question is, does Europe want Russian gas? Before the war, Europe relied on Russia for more than 40% of its gas imports. But a lot has changed since then. Estimates say that Russia has cut its gas supplies to the EU by almost 88%, and this has not been easy for the consumers. For one, wholesale prices of gas in Europe have more than doubled. We have been telling you about Europe's energy crisis for months now. So to answer the previous question, does Europe need gas, Russian gas? Yes, it does, certainly. But will it accept Russian gas? Now that's the more complicated question. Germany has an answer. Here's what the government spokesperson said. I'm quoting. Independently of the possible sabotage of the two pipelines, we have seen that Russia is no longer a reliable energy supplier, and that even before the damage to Nord Stream 1, there was no longer any gas flowing. Let me tell you what he's saying. In other words, Germany is saying no to Russian gas. Its reserves are almost full, so it has enough gas to get through the winters. But only and only if it exercises frugality. A plan is already in place. Germany is limiting the use of heating in public buildings. There is also a limit on lighting. Spain has come up with a similar curb. In fact, there is a pan-EU deal to cut gas usage by some 15%. Now, Putin may have seen Germany's rejection coming because he has a backup plan in place already. Putin has reached out to the Turkish president, Erdogan. Russia wants to export more gas to Europe via Turkey, basically make it the new supply hub of Russian gas. And by doing so, maintain Russia's hold on European energy, the European energy market. But nitty-gritties aside, the bigger question here is, why is Putin offering what he is? Why is he changing his mind? Why does the Russian president want to resume gas supplies to Europe? Is it about money from the gas sale? Or about coming across as a bigger person in this war, about optics? We can't answer that. So we put this question to Fred Weir. He's a political analyst. He joined me earlier from Moscow. Listen in to what he said.
I think it's a combination of things, but gas is not Russia's biggest earner. Oil is. And until a couple of weeks ago, Russia was playing a complicated game with Europe, especially Germany, around the Nord Stream pipelines. It was cutting off the supplies in order to put on political pressure and holding out the possibility of restoring those supplies if political concessions would be made. And then somebody overturned the whole game by blowing up those pipelines, and Russia lost all of its leverage. So I think what Putin is trying to do now is restore that leverage, the ability to turn on the gas for Europe if they're more cooperative and friendly toward Russia. That's what this is about. The Turk Stream pipeline has existed for some time, for a few years. It's been in operation. It's much, much smaller in capacity than the Nord Stream lines were, but it can probably be expanded. Turkey can be brought in as a partner. I think that's what Putin and Erdogan were talking about. And therefore, it can become Turkey's responsibility. And so Russia is trying to restore leverage. That's what this is all about.
You heard him. Russia is trying to restore its leverage. That's what experts are saying. Well, it's actually quite a mixed offer that Vladimir Putin has. On one hand, he's ready to send gas to Europe. And on the other, he's already talking about restricting energy resources to countries, capping energy prices. Which are these countries? The G7. The world's 7 largest economies have pledged to put a cap on the price of Russian oil. We are talking about the likes of France, Germany, Italy, the same European countries that Putin is offering gas to. And here's what he has to say about them.
We will not supply energy resources to countries which will cap its prices to those who prefer card sharpers' tricks and shameless blackmail to business partnership and market schemes.
So what's one to make of all this? Your guess is as good as mine. We'll of course be tracking all the updates and bringing you to them. And now let's shift our focus to Iran. Protests continue over the death of Mahsa Amini, as does the Iranian regime's brutal crackdown. But for the first time in years, cracks seem to be appearing among Iran's ruling elite. Our next report brings you the details.
Iran is protesting the death of Mahsa Amini. The 22-year-old is said to have died in police custody. What was her crime? Not wearing her hijab properly. Public anger has erupted all over Iran. Women have been burning their hijabs, cutting their hair in defiance. From schoolgirls to grandmothers, Iranian women are demanding their rights. The right to wear what they want. A chant is ringing out all over Iran. Women, life, freedom. Another chant is also common. Death to the dictator. Iranian protesters have been clashing with the regime. The Iranian state has unleashed a wave of repression. Reports say more than 200 protesters have been killed. The Iranian regime is known to stifle dissent. The ruling elite has been united against all protests in the past. That seemed to be the case this time too. Besides a violent crackdown on protesters, the regime said that Amini died due to a prior ailment. It has tried to discredit Amini's family. Iran has blamed the US and Israel for the protests. It has called some protesters agents of the enemy.
Some of these persons are elements of enemy, and if they are not, they are in direction of the enemy. They go to the streets with the same goals as the enemy. Some of them are not with the enemy. They are just emotional.
Whatever the methods, Iran's ruling elite has presented a united front. Until now. Ali Larijani, a former parliamentary speaker, has broken ranks. He warned the regime not to pursue an extremist policy. He has appeared as a voice of moderation. Before we look at what he said, let's look at who he is. Larijani has been a key figure in Iranian politics for decades. He served as Speaker of the Parliament of Iran from 2008 to 2020. Before that, he was a Brigadier General in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He even fought in the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. Larijani is neither radical or revolutionary, though it should be noted he was barred from standing for the presidency last year. Iran's Guardian Council deemed him unqualified, but reports claim it was for another reason. It was because he posed a real challenge to the current president, Ebrahim Raisi. Now let's look at some of his comments during an interview with an Iranian news site. Larijani called the hijab a cultural issue. He said that the police should not be enforcing it. He called the stringent rules around the hijab excessive and likened them to medical overprescription. Larijani also noted how people voluntarily wore the hijab before the 1979 revolution. Remember, wearing the hijab was not enforced during the Shah's reign, so he suggested letting the people manage their own affairs. Iran has seen many protests over the years, but its leaders have always stood together. Perhaps the cracks can be seen as a sign of the significance of the protests over Mahsa Amini's death. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Right, let's move on. I want to show you guys a video. Most of you would have already seen this. It's viral. It's from a college campus in Spain. And before I show you what happened, I'd like to warn our viewers what's happening is disturbing, to say the least. If you haven't seen this already, you may not understand the gravity of what's actually happening in this video. Let me explain why we had to filter most of what was being said, or rather yelled. In the video, nearly 100 male university students were shouting expletives from their windows. They were hurling abuses in the direction of an all-female college in Spain. The now viral video has sparked massive outrage across the world. It gets worse. There seems to be a choreographed, coordinated mass catcalling, where college students, men, are yelling expletives and sexist slurs at women. And this is not the first time this is happening. Local media in Spain says that this is almost like a custom or tradition, where older students at the college encourage the younger ones to do the same, almost like a rite of passage for new students. The video was shared by a Spanish politician a few days back and has been shared extensively across social media. Meanwhile, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez also commented on the video. He described the behavior, and I'm quoting him, as inexplicable, unjustified, and disgusting. The college where all this happened has issued a public statement. The Elias Ahuja College authorities condemned the video, adding that those behind it would be expelled. It also put a focus on gender equality and awareness on campus. And that's what I'd like to talk about. But if you see the comments and outrage trickling in on social media vis-a-vis this video, the incident seems to be part of a much bigger problem. It is not just confined to one country. Such toxic behavior and misogyny has now been normalized. It is brushed aside as college humor or university culture. Be it locker room chatter or shameless catcalling or harassment on campuses, abusive behavior is often brushed under the carpet. And what happened in Spain is one example among countless others. In Australia, the first nationally coordinated survey on student safety was released back in 2017. It confirmed that universities were host to widespread sexual assault and harassment. And years later, nothing has really changed. In 2021, it was found that 1 in 6 students has been sexually harassed since starting university. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, a survey by the Royal Historical Society had shown that female academics, regardless of whether they had a PhD or were professors, they're all exploited and marginalized by, I'm quoting, macho practices and cultures. That is what the survey says. In India, too, a recent survey of higher educational institutes found that 77% of women reported having faced some sort of subtle sexism from male students. 5 years on, it's difficult to say how much the situation has changed. I could go on. Campuses across the world are rife with stories of toxic macho traditions. And what happened in Spain is just a glimpse into what may be going unreported across universities. Now, what I'm about to tell you next is alarming. A new study on the loss of biodiversity says that we've lost nearly 70% of our wildlife population in the last 50 years. That's no small figure. It suggests that we're already in the age of mass extinction. From the oceans to rainforests, wildlife population is plummeting everywhere. The steepest decline has been in Latin America, followed by Africa and Asia. So what explains this trend? What can be done to stop it? Our next report has some answers.
Are we in another age of mass extinction? An era of biological annihilation? A period of wildlife decline? Yes, say scientists. According to a new study, our world's wildlife population has declined 69% in just 50 years. From the oceans to the rainforests to the mountains, the Earth's wildlife population has plummeted everywhere. The steepest decline has been in Latin America and the Caribbean. with a 94% drop in wildlife population size. In 48 years, Africa had the second largest fall at 66%. Asia and the Pacific come next at 55%, followed by North America at 20%, and Europe and Central Asia at 18%. What explains this decline? An obvious suspect: human greed. Our insatiable thirst for more. The report blames urbanization, the overuse of limited resources, the destruction of habitats for farming, the dumping of human waste in nature, and the overexploitation of endangered species as the biggest contributors to biodiversity loss. Do you know how many species these factors have further put at risk? 1 million! According to a United Nations report, 1 million of the estimated 8 million plant and animal species could face extinction due to human activities in the coming decades. These figures are alarming. What's worse, the impact will not be limited to plants and animals. Even human beings will have to pay the cost. Here's how. 1. As human development pushes deeper into wildlife, we face a heightened risk of being exposed to new diseases, infectious viruses that jump from animals to humans. 2. As we decimate our ecosystems and expand further into forests, we only decrease the quality of what we consume, namely water, air, and food. And 3. As we endanger species further, we only destroy the web of life. You see, every time a species goes extinct, everything around it becomes fragile. Every other species dependent on it gets endangered too. Scientists say this triggers a domino effect, because we're all connected in the web of life. So, what can we do about it? Revisit some school lessons, perhaps, or just stroll through a wildlife refuge for a reality check. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Now, as we know, California is famous for its beaches, redwood trees. And how can we forget? It's home to Hollywood. But there's another thing that it is famous for. The state is home to the Central Valley, which is a large-scale producer of red and juicy tomatoes. However, several regions of California are struggling with a prolonged drought since 2020. And this has dealt a severe blow to the tomato harvest. Our next report has more.
Under the scorching sun of California's historic heat wave, outside the Central Valley farming city of Fiber, a tractor and harvester machine drove through a field of tomatoes. Row by row, the harvester machines pulled the deep red and luscious tomatoes, sorted them from their veins and dumped them into a load. Once full, the load weighed roughly 25 tons. This harvest of tomatoes has come about 2 weeks earlier than usual. What is the reason for this early harvest, you might wonder? A fourth-generation farmer, Aaron Barcelos, was forced to take this decision due to the intense heat and an ongoing drought, which has parched the land and cut into crop yields.
95% of these tomatoes are dark red, which means they're ripe and ready for harvest. And so they're going to have the most flavor and be fresher than your fresh market tomato in the store these days. That tastes great, right?
In Firebar this year, Barcelos planted tomatoes over just 530 acres of land, which is nearly 1/3 of the area he usually harvests on his family's farm.
You know, a tomato crop will take about 24 to 28 inches of water to grow the way we're doing it. And if we don't have that water, we just won't grow it. That's why you see we have so many fallow acres, because we just can't take the risk of planting a crop and then not having the water to reach maturity.
Not just in Fiber, the same scene is playing out across much of the state of California, where lack of rain and the restricted water supplies from the Colorado River have withered summer crops like tomatoes and onions, and has threatened the growth of leafy greens in coming winter months. Drought in an area known as the Salad Bowl of the United States has not only impacted fresh produce, but pantry staples like pasta sauce and pre-made dinners as well. Up the road is Los Banos, the Ingomar Packing Company, which supplies tomato paste and diced tomatoes to food producers. It's facing dwindling supplies and has to relay this news to customers. The situation has worsened to the point that ketchup and sauce makers are sourcing tomatoes from other regions to make up for California's shortfall.
It's tough. It's not fun. Being primarily in sales, I enjoy helping customers out, getting them the product they need, selling tomato paste. But now there's essentially nothing to sell, and as the crop gets shorter and shorter, there becomes times when you have to have conversations with customers about not being able to pack their entire volume, which is something that we very much like to avoid.
And inevitably, the limited supply has pushed up prices. California experienced a drought from 2012 to 2016, but the worst came in 2020, which continues to this day and has only been getting worse every year. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
Now, before we wrap up tonight's show, I want to tell you about a very interesting study that I came across. It is about the benefits of mud. You heard me right, or playing with muck. Most of us have done that in our childhood. You must have played football in the mud, or gone out to catch tadpoles during the rainy season and come back home all muddy. Children today don't do that, sadly. At least most of them don't. And they could be losing out on immunity because of that. A new study has found that mud can build resilience against a whole host of illnesses, both mental and physical. I'm talking about allergies, asthma, anxiety, depression. The obvious question is, what's mud got to do with any of this? So the study points out that the dirt outside has a lot of friendly microorganisms. When they come in contact with our body, they help us build immunity. Makes sense, right? Then it also means that one could get a lot of these benefits by just playing outside. Even if there is no mud involved. And that's true. You see, the soil outside has a lot of natural minerals that are good for us. Most of us have reaped their benefits by playing outside while we were growing up. We have soiled our clothes, jumped in puddles, come back home with mud stains. But what's concerning today is that children are not getting these benefits of these activities. They don't climb trees. They barely go to playgrounds. Children today are mostly surrounded by gadgets. In the US, for example, a child spends nearly 7 hours a day in front of a screen, glued to a screen, and just about 4 to 7 minutes a day in an unstructured play outdoors. Just 4 to 7 minutes. This is a crisis, and it has a name. It is called nature deficit disorder. And children aren't the only ones to be blamed here. Today, when a child cries or throws a tantrum, her parents console her by playing Peppa Pig on iPads. What if we gave them a ball instead to play and asked them to play outside with it? What if parents today gave nature a chance to do its magic on children? You see, a strong immunity is just one of the many benefits of playing outside. Studies show that spending more time outside helps in confidence building. It promotes creativity, imagination, also teaches responsibility. For example, a child learns to take care of living beings, the leaves, the stray dogs, the squirrels. She learns what happens if she pulls a plant outside by its roots. Come to think of it, a child is more likely to learn more lessons on science by spending time outside than by watching some educational video on a phone. Being in nature also teaches her how to deal with stress. She will learn how to conduct herself calmly when bitten by a bug or after getting her knees bruised. These are crucial life lessons. Look at this study. It says people who spend a majority of their childhood in a rural setup show a more muted response to stressful events like public speaking. In other words, they are less likely to be anxious or depressed. And that's the magic of nature that I was talking about. And you know what? Most parents know all of this. They know what is good for their child and what's not. They know what playing outdoors can do and how it can help in the child's development. It's just that today parents are scared to send their young ones outside or leave them unattended. And it's not just about the pandemic. There are fears around a child's safety, her security. And while these fears are valid, there are ways to ensure a child stays safe when playing outside. You could send her to a playground in a gated community or ones that have CCTV installed perhaps. My point is simple. If a parent is willing to make that transition from gadgets to grounds, then there are a lot of ways to ensure that the change happens. Do you agree? Do write to us and let us know what you think. And on that note, it's time to take a look at what's happening around the world in Gravitas Global Headlines.
Russian missiles pound more than 40 Ukrainian cities and towns in 24 hours as NATO allies unveil plans to beef up Europe's air defenses. Embattled British Prime Minister Liz Truss faces more trouble after a prominent Conservative Party insider said some of her own MPs are considering a push to replace her with two former rivals. The French government orders workers back to a second fuel depot in a bid to ease petrol shortages from a 3-week strike. US inflation jumps more than expected in September to 8.2% on a yearly basis, with price increases for food and medical care weighing on consumers. The final consumer inflation report before midterm elections. The US releases its national security strategy and flags China as its top threat, refers to India as key partner, says it would prioritize winning over China, seeing it as the only global rival to the United States. Japan's defense minister claims North Korea may have developed nuclear warheads small enough to be carried by medium-range ballistic missiles in an attack. The Indian Supreme Court passes a split verdict on a batch of appeals challenging restriction on Muslim girl students wearing hijab in educational institutions. Google allows Donald Trump's Truth Social app in its Play Store for Android devices after receiving assurances that the app would meet standards for moderating harmful content. Mohamed Salah netted the fastest Champions League hat-trick of all time in Liverpool's 7-1 win over Scotland Rangers. Barcelona's hopes of reaching the knockouts are hanging by a thread after a 3-all draw with Inter Milan. American Brendan Steele finished with 4 straight birdies to take the first-round lead at the PGA Tour's Zozo Championship in Tokyo. Defending champion Hideki Matsuyama got off to a slow start in front of his home crowd and tied for 41st position.
And that's a wrap on the show. Thanks for watching Gravitas with me, Priyanka Sharma, as always leaving you with Gravitas Images.